Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our weekly edition of our Iron Sharpening Iron podcast. And I am just absolutely tickled that Jack Hafer is with us this morning. And Jack is from Salem, Oregon. Welcome to. And Jack and I have known each other, I'm going to say at least 11 years, possibly 12. But Jack is a very dear friend. He's a true student of God's word. He's been preaching God's word for, dare I say, nearly 50 years. And he's also one of the finest gentlemen you're ever going to meet. And so I'm just super excited to have Jack on this morning. Jack, why don't you tell our friends here in Fort Scott a bit about yourself?
Well, hello, everybody. It's glad to be on. Thank you for Bill. And I consider you as friend as well. And it's nice for the invite. I just want to start, by saying hi to Barbara Ray.
Absolutely.
Lyle and June Smith were my parents' best friends. They went hunting together. They played cards together. And so we have a connection, I do, with the church there in Fort Scott, even though you don't know me and I don't know you all. But Lyle, boy, he just, when you're a little kid looking up that big guy, he didn't just model what being a husband was like, but he modeled for me what being a Christian, and their marriage was a good model too. So I want to say hi to Barbara and her family, and look forward to seeing you sometime. But no, I'm here in South Salem, Oregon. Of course, that's the capital of Oregon. Been here since 2001. Before that, we were in Coeur d'Alene, and you just had Steve Finley on from Coeur d'Alene. And so I'm so glad he's up there and doing well. But my wife is with me here, and we have one daughter living here with her husband from Chile. My other daughter lives in Fort Collins, and my oldest is my son, Kurt. He's in Korea. He married a Japanese. And so we have an international family. So that's great.
Well, I don't know if I'd shared with you, Jack, but youngest daughter, Miranda, she's, as you know, she's active duty in the military. She's going to be going to Naples, Italy at the end of this year. So we too will be an international family.
Well, good. And it's amazing. This virus has changed everything. We were supposed to go to Japan, canceled. Of course, wanted to do a meeting, several this year. They're all canceled. So I'm glad we can connect on the internet.
Yeah, and the people here in Fort Scott, at least here at our congregation, I've been telling them about you for quite some time. So this gives people an opportunity to put a face to a name.
Well, I'll pay you later for the nice things you said. Appreciate it.
All right, steak dinner's on Jack. Hey, I want to take a quick minute and just tell the people how we know each other, because from my perspective, it's kind of amusing in that you had done a gospel meeting for our congregation back in the Northwest there, and I missed the last day of the meeting, which was a Sunday.
Yes.
Because I had worked the night previously. I'd worked a night shift, and then I'd been asked to run up to Seattle and preach up there and cover for somebody who was out of town.
Yeah, and I remember that story.
Okay, so
I heard all about you. Everyone was talking about Bill Downing. Well, where is he? Well, he's working. He's gone. And I finally met you on Sunday, but you can finish the story.
We did. We met at a potluck at one of the elders' house, and I was so tired I fell asleep in the chair. Well, sometime later, I see that you and Travis had posted a picture of sleeping Bill in the chair. And I just thought that was funny because...
Yeah, this is the infamous Bill, sleep on the chair. At least you didn't sleep in my lesson. I appreciate it.
It just showed me what a lighthearted guy you were. And I've loved you ever since. Now, Jack has one major downfall, and we've got a handful of people watching this morning. I want you to know that Jack is a Oregon Duck fan, which, as a Washington Husky fan, that doesn't go well.
Look at that.
That's the one thing I've got on Jack is that he
well, when you're in Rome, as you do as a Roman. So in Oregon, you got to be a Duck fan. And didn't we beat the Huskies? Oh yeah, we won't.
You did. Well, and you saw the other day I was wearing a Kansas City t-shirt, so
good.
I suppose, yeah, I shouldn't push too hard. All right. So this morning, Jack, I thought we would talk a little bit about Christian marriage and Christian parenting. And for the folks watching, I specifically asked Jack to talk about this because there are some delicate things about marriage and parenting that are kind of delicate. And Jack talks in such a way that he makes it easy for us to kind of digest. And I suppose, Jack, if we're going to talk about marriage, perhaps maybe the first thing we should do is maybe define what that is. What
Mhm,
defines marriage?
mhm. Well, it's an important topic, as you know, in the culture we live today, where there's no absolutes, everything's relative. Marriage is pretty much what you want to define it for yourself. And so, of course, we're living in an age of same-sex marriage, and it's so confusing. So it's a great question that you asked, or topic, because we want to have a biblical point of view or biblical worldview. How does God define marriage, and how can we have a happy marriage? And but let me just say right up front, man, I haven't been the best husband in the world, because it's like being a parent. The kids don't come home with a manual. And when you get married, boy, you look back and say, if I could have done things different, or if I would have been better here or more mature. But it's a process, isn't it? And so anything I say, I'm only going to say it from my negative experiences. Don't do that. Try it this way instead. And of course, God's word is going to be the standard. So, yeah. What is a marriage? Where would you start with that?
Well, I guess it's a two-pronged answer. The
Yes.
first prong, I would say that some of our denominational friends define marriage based on the physical relationship that's there. But in Malachi chapter 2, verse 14, I think gives us the other prong, which is the real answer, which is the vow that two people take before God. Of course, we're talking man and woman. That's non-debatable.
Yes.
So, in our definition of marriage, we don't need to debate beyond that. So, when a man and a woman take their oath before God, Malachi 2:14 says, God watched those vows. He heard what we said when we took our vows. And I think that's the what defines marriage, not the physical, intimate stuff that takes place beyond that.
Right. And so when you think about it, yeah, it's a marriage is a covenant of companions. And because both those words are found in Malachi chapter 2 and verse 14. He said, you have dealt treacherously, although she's your companion and your wife by covenant. And if we understand both those words, I think it helps us understand, first of all, the beauty of marriage, because sometimes I failed to remember that marriage was created before the fall of man. In paradise, as we call it on the world, there was no sin. It was just all joy. And when God's going through the process of creating things, at the end of each day, of course, he said it was good. He creates man on the sixth day, and he looks at there, and we have the first commentary about what he's doing. It's a little insight into his process of creating. He looks at it and said, it's not good that man should be alone.
Right.
So we're still on the sixth day, because I understand the woman is created on the sixth day as well. So he creates woman out of man's rib and presents woman to the man, and she's presented as a helpmeet. And if we understand what that word helpmeet is, because sometimes we think it's a diminutive term, like she has a subservient role, but it's when you look in the Bible, it's someone that is suited to be a companion. It's the idea of a helper, and it's used throughout the Psalms, for example, where God is called our helper, our
Mhm.
helpmeet. And so I say this, for example, Psalms 33, verse 20, our soul waits for the Lord. He is our help and our shield. And then later he says, he's my help and my deliverer. If anything, it exalts the woman to a preeminent position, that she's not, not a diminutive role.
Right.
or else you're casting aspersion against God himself, that as a helper, he's somehow below us because he serves us. No, it's quite the opposite. And so what a beautiful thing, because afterwards God said, it is very good. Man and woman, he said, with two will become one flesh, perfectly the same, created equally in God's image, have that status, but yet totally different and complementary. Man is alone by himself, but he's complete with the woman, and likewise with a woman. It's a beautiful thing when you look at it. And sex does not define the marriage, as you started. It's a blessing of marriage. But marriage
Absolutely.
itself is something more intimate than just the physical pleasures.
For our friends who are watching with us this morning, we are live with Jack Hafer in Salem, Oregon. And I'm monitoring our Facebook page here. So if you have questions or comments beyond what Sam Bray just dropped in the comment section, feel free to drop those comments or questions, and I'll pass them along to Jack as we go along here. Jack, I've been working on a book on Christian marriage.
Yes.
And I've been listening a lot to your old mentor, Lowell Williams, who I've been fortunate enough to garner a bunch of Lowell's material. I came across an illustration about a year ago. A guy named Roy Vickerman and another young lady named Nora Jackson, and they're in their 90s.
Sorry about that call.
They were apparently engaged as younger people, separated by World War II, end up becoming widower and widow years later, and then they were going to get married. And this was about within the last 18 months or so. And so I would submit to you that their level of sexual intimacy at their age is probably minimal, if next to none. Right. So what makes them married is in fact the vow that they're taking before Jehovah. Right. And God says, I was a witness to those vows. I heard what you said. And yet I feel like, particularly in American culture, the vast majority of people that take those marriage vows don't take them very seriously. Right. What do you think about that?
Well, exactly. And so when we go back to a working definition of marriage, marriage is a covenant. And as you started, between a man and a woman, and it's a covenant made before God, and it's made for a lifetime. When Jesus is talking about that in Matthew 19, he says, do you not know that God made man, or male and female? So it's interesting. He acknowledges the creation of the two sexes. Of course, that's a whole nother topic. You know, we live in this relative world where now genders are fluid because they think gender is a social construct made by man and it's not absolute. But no, Jesus, if you're going to have a biblical point of view, he's male and female. And said what God has joined together. And that's very interesting language. And so it's a covenant, and it's covenant made with God as our witness. And he actually joins the two together when I acknowledge. And so you have to have this willingness. I'm going to take you as my spouse, in my case, my wife. And reciprocally, she's going to look and say, I will voluntarily, freely take you as my husband. And then there's some conditions, because every covenant has conditions or contractual terms.
Okay.
I'll be faithful to you for the rest of my life.
Right.
And then there, in the Old Testament, there's conjugal rights and, you know, taking care of the wife. And there's other things that are implied or actually stated, but those conditions are part of the oath. I'll be faithful to you. And of course, in our vows, we say in sickness and health and until death do us part. And see, God witnesses that, doesn't he? And he's the one that's doing the joining. It's not the preacher. It's something very sacred and holy. Again, made in paradise.
Well, that's right. So God, from his divine throne, only ever made two institutions. And the very first one that God created is the institution of marriage. Now, you keep using the word covenant. Is the word covenant maybe a stronger word than the word contract, maybe?
Well, that's a good question. When when you think of a covenant, of course, we talk about our last will and covenant.
Okay.
When someone dies, it's their and it's supposed to be binding and irrevocable, even though they're always challenged. But a covenant is agreement. Sometimes it's called a contract. I think the Hebrew word is a bereth. And it's interesting when God made a covenant with Abraham that he's going to make a great nation. This will give you the idea of the seriousness of it. He had Abraham do some peculiar things, take some animals and slaughter them, cut them in half, and lay them on, uh, you know, on either side with a path in the middle. And then the Lord walked through those things with flaming fire, and he's like, "What is going on?"
Right.
We call this, as you know, the cutting of the covenant, and it was typical of that day when you made a covenant. You're vowing to each other, I will honor this more than just, a contract that's, notarized and sealed. May this happen to me if I break it. May I be split open and devoured. And God chose to invoke that when he made a covenant with us. And so that gives us an idea of how serious the covenant is between a man and woman when you say, yes, I do.
Right. And I appreciate you saying that, because I think we need to understand, probably if we were building with building blocks, the first block has to be just how serious a thing we're talking about when a man and a woman come together and they take those marriage vows. And probably another cultural thing for us today, since everything's relative, is people writing their own
Yes.
uh, vows. And not that inherently is bad, but a lot of times you see now where they're leaving out the "till death do us part" or "in sickness
Yes.
and in health." And one very famous actor had come down ill, decides to divorce his wife, and but that's not what God calls us to do. God calls us to stay faithful to
Yes.
that commitment to one another, regardless of the circumstances.
Yes.
And a lot of times, what happens in America is that we go through a rough patch, and every marriage does. Right? There's not a marriage out there that hasn't had a rough time. So things are fine. We're sailing along. Everything's smooth, and okay, yeah, it's easy to love Bill when things are going easy. What about when things are hard? That's when those marriage vows become more important,
Right.
in good times and bad
Exactly.
times, and especially when it's really hard. Which kind of, if you think about it, it's a statement of our faith.
Yes.
For example, Jesus tells us to pray for our enemies and those who wish to do us harm. Well, how much more so those who are brethren? Okay. Well, you can parlay that and say, well, uh, our discipleship isn't always easy. Well, our
Right.
marriage isn't always easy, and when times are tough, that's when you really need to knuckle down and make the extra effort.
Yeah. And especially today with this stay home, stay healthy policy that's in place in every state. Basically, you're supposed to stay home. There's concerns, the counselors and people say, of rising marital abuse because all those problems or lack of functioning marriage
Hmm.
become, you know, more exposed when people are confined to the same place. And it's interesting, things like this crisis, like this pandemic, they don't create the problems, they just expose the problems that are already inherently there,
Hmm.
and your true character comes out. So yes, well said. That, yeah, marriage is going to have problems, and there'll be good times and bad times, but that's where we learn to become, manage this one flesh thing. It's a dance, isn't it?
It
And
is a
we
dance.
learn to, not step on each other's toes, and to get along in harmony like Christ in the church. So yes.
Yeah, and so as a policeman, we used to joke, okay, the holidays, usually you see the domestic violence calls go up, and
Oh,
there's even been some here that guys that I know say, well, yeah, with this, people sheltering in place, that the calls for domestic violence are going to go up. But people who are truly trying to live their marriage according to God's pattern really should be flourishing at this time. And I, like Kim and I were talking about that last night, that the last couple of weeks have been great because we've just been spending so much time together, and it's been quality time, and we've been able to have Bible studies together. And I think you learn to be more graceful and patient, with one another, because you have to in order to make these, the
Yes.
day-to-day dance work, right?
Yes. That's nice. And, we always say, if I had more time, I would pray more, I'd read more, or I'd spend more time with my family. Well, we have the time now. So it's actually, there's opportunities and blessings in the midst of all this virus.
Yeah,
Mm.
absolutely. Absolutely. All right. I want to digress just a little bit. Uh, you pointed out the Genesis 2 account, particularly verses 19 and 20, where God made creation. He made all these animals. He had made Adam. And I think we need to be cognizant of what God said and what he didn't say. He looked at creation and said that everything he had made was good. What he said was not good was not his creation wasn't good, but that of all the things that he had made, there's not a helper suitable for Adam. And
Mm.
so God then goes and he creates the answer to that problem in Genesis 2:21 and 22. Now she is help meet. She's womb man, means she's a version 2 of man, but she has a womb. So
Mm-hmm.
she's designed a little bit differently than the first version is, isn't she? And she has kind of a special purpose
Mm-hmm.
the other creation didn't have. Why don't you take a minute and touch on that for us?
As far as you're talking about now, roles, you think? Or is a purpose or what?
Well, yeah, I mean, if God looked at Adam and said it's not good that he should be alone,
Mm-hmm.
and
Right.
she then becomes the answer to that problem,
Yes.
what do you see? I mean, obviously, she's a special
Yes.
being in her own right, and she
Yes.
serves a very special purpose. Now, from a
Yes.
Christian perspective, what does that look like?
Yeah. So that's interesting. When we go back and immerse ourselves in that context and what happened before God said it's not good for man to be alone, he paraded all the animals in front of Adam, and Adam got to
Exactly.
name
Yeah.
them. And of course, I know he didn't use English, but wouldn't that be quite an event? Giraffe, cockroach, I guess, maybe hippopotamus. It would have been fun. But as they all go through and he names them, of course, they stuck. He realized, I think, as I understand it, wait, they all have a companion in life. And it's interesting going back to this idea of not accepting genders as God has made them, male and female. Paul even argues in 1 Corinthians 11, when he's talking about the same subject, says, does not nature teach you? And he says, when you just look at nature, so let's just talk to the atheists, and then we'll come back to Christians now. Even if you don't believe in God, Paul's arguing nature should teach you that there are genders and roles solidified just naturally.
Right.
And if it's survival of the fittest, look what evolution has produced. You have a big bull elk with massive horns, and then you have his cow, and then he has a harem. And usually in nature, there are exceptions, but the general rule is the male's larger. He has more body mass. He's more aggressive. There's testosterone at 20 times the level as a female. Shouldn't even go here. I'll get in trouble. But the male's usually prettier in nature, like a rooster pheasant, and then the hen or a mallard duck. I had to bring the ducks in here again. But
by the way, Sam wanted me to ask you who your favorite football team is, but I believe we've covered that already.
Yeah, right. If he would have been on in time, he would have got that. But and so nature teaches us there's unique differences, even though we're perfectly created in God's image. We share the same value in his eyes.
Right.
We're both in his image. But she's opposite in so many ways. And so it's not good. Like you're missing somebody. They all have a companion.
Hmm.
That's why I say marriage is a companion, a covenant of companions forever.
Right. Right.
That here is someone that's suitable, that meets my needs, a spiritual entity living in a physical body that's female while I'm male. So she has a womb. Wow. You know, it's sometimes people would imply that the woman's role, for example, in marriage, the biblical point of view is somehow subservient to the man because she subjects. It's nothing could be farther from the truth. We're talking about roles, and roles don't speak about equality, do they?
Right.
Roles just are roles. Now,
Exactly.
children have the same value in God's eyes as the parent, but the children are supposed to obey the parents. And when you were the policeman, did you have a police superior? What was he called?
Absolutely. I had a sergeant. Above him was a lieutenant. Above him is the chief. And so uh,
You had to
you're
submit
talking
then,
about
generally.
roles. Yeah,
Right,
exactly. Or think about flying a plane, right? You have a
right.
pilot, a co-pilot, and I'm pretty sure that co-pilot is every bit as capable of flying that plane. But you have roles because I think what we're talking about, and we'll get to Ephesians 5 maybe in a little bit, but we're talking about culpability, right?
Yes,
Somebody has to be culpable. And in the
yes,
Christian family, God has said, guess what? Dads, husbands,
yes.
you're the one that's culpable. But it's not that she's any less. And I suppose this would be a good time to bring in First Peter chapter 3, verse 7. Because
Sure.
as you're talking about men and women, and there's 100 different ways in which we are different. And now, our atheist friends would disagree with us, but it is absolutely true that she is so much different than I am, right? And I'll just
Yes.
see that my wife Kim has tuned in, so I'll pick on Kim for a minute. She's prettier than I am. She's she's softer than I am. She thinks differently than I do. When we have conversation, she frames things differently than I do, right? So First Peter 3:7 is such a fascinating passage, particularly for all you men who are watching, because uh, God tells man two things. First one is learn how your wife thinks, feels, processes, learn everything about your wife that you can possibly know. And oh, by the way, she's your spiritual equal.
Let's read that for the people that aren't familiar. So, you husbands, likewise, live with your wife in an understanding way. And that's what you're referring to. You come to know her, what makes her tick, and what her needs are, and where her assets are, and where she can excel.
Right.
As a weaker vessel, which is an interesting phrase, since she is a woman, and grant her honor as a fellow heir of the grace of life. So your prayers may not be hindered. So she has equal value in God's eyes as her child. So have you ever, was any of your sergeants or your superiors, did you regard them as more of a person of higher value than yourself? Or did
Absolutely
some,
not.
or did sometimes they have less character and less values? And actually they could even be despicable, right?
Oh, well, yeah, I want to
Yeah,
be
I know
careful
you've been
how I
through that.
answer that question, but you're right. And I think just if we're talking about taking an oath of public office, just from that
Yes.
perspective, we've all taken the same oath. We all swore to uphold the laws of the Constitution and the laws of the state and of our respective community. But just because you have rank doesn't make you a higher individual per se.
Exactly. So roles and value and importance to God are totally different subjects. They're not connected. And so just because a woman has her unique role and a man has his does not mean one is superior to the other. And
Amen.
we're fed this by the world, and we have to fight back because the whole world operates with the idea of submission to authority. A
Right.
president, a CEO, a school teacher, a principal, a coach. If you're not listening to the coach, you're going to walk. So
Right.
and so it's something to be valued, embraced, because then you can flourish in your marriage when you accept the differences in the roles and then you fulfill them to the best of your ability. That's the dance we're talking about. Someone has to lead, someone has to follow.
Let me just interject for just a minute. Peter Wanera our friend from Uganda says hello. He misses you.
Hey, Peter.
And we have
Surprised to have you on. Wow.
BJ tuning in from Kentucky. BJ, good to
BJ
see you
Kylie,
on with us this morning.
congratulations on your new baby.
I know, right?
Mhm.
That's excellent. Okay, so we're talking about the dance, and speaking of dancing, typically in a dance, you usually have, the male's usually the leader of that dance, and the woman kind of follows suit, and however that works. It's the same in a marriage, and
Exactly.
I think people, particularly men, I think are guilty of reading Ephesians chapter 5 and says, okay, God says it's my culpability to be responsible for the family, and so we uh, I've known men who have abused that privilege. But I think we need to focus on the fact that God says, look, you're different in every different way. Matter of fact, Shantae Feldham wrote a book called Just for Him. In her attempt to explain the female thought processes went like this. She said, imagine you have your web browser open and you have multiple windows open at once. And then your email has just got emails coming in one after the other after the next, because that's a female brain. Whereas the man's brain is, one web browser open and maybe a singular uh, email at best, just demonstrating
Yes.
one of the many, many different ways that we are different, but in the most important way, which is in the spiritual, that we are totally equal.
Exactly. Well said. Yeah, Dr. Daniel Amen has done brain specs of a man's brain, and we think right side and then left side. And women's brains, like you said, they light up. They're cross between the hemispheres. Men don't typically use their frontal cortex, and that's what helps us use wisdom and caution where women do. That's why guys get in trouble a lot. And that's probably why women live longer than men too, because sometimes we're kind of stupid. But so we need the intuition of the wife. And that's why when it comes to like decision-making process, some men abuse it, as you said, the relationship. Well, I'm the head of the household. I decide, you follow. No. Jesus led by leadership, by
Yes.
service.
Mm-hmm.
He said, the greatest among you is a servant of all. And that's how he led, by servants. And so a good husband that models as Christ led the church will serve. And that requires him to understand what the needs of the family are, the needs of the wife, what's in the best interest of her and him. And then ultimately, if you can't make a consensus together that's unanimous, he has to make a decision. But I like what you said. Yes, he's responsible for when things go well, but he's also responsible when things go bad. Because as the
Absolutely.
head, if things go bad financially or physically or whatever, the kids, it's the dad's fault ultimately, because he is the head and he can't cast it off on anyone else, that responsibility.
So you're exactly right. And I've known some wives who are wives to an elder who have said, there's a lot of times when I feel like I'm the one who should be making the decisions. I'm the one who should be kind of pulling the levers and pushing the buttons. But then I have to remember that, well, if things go good, fine.
Yes.
But if we're talking about culpability, who's responsible? That's also true for the flip side. If things
Yeah.
don't go well, somebody has to be responsible. And
Yeah.
then it's not fun to be the one in charge, right?
Who gets fired when your team does not perform? It's the
Well,
coach, isn't it?
okay. So
Yeah.
being the one responsible is almost like walking a razor's edge, isn't it?
Yeah. Sometimes it would be easier. And this is not amusing, but it's just like, really? The world says, okay, we don't like the biblical roles for husbands and wives in marriages as far as leadership and submission and being helpmeets. And so women, go out there and fulfill your purpose in life, get a career, take on all, do everything men do, as well as raise children, be a homemaker. And they're taking on the man's role as well as their role. And the guys back there just playing and laughing. And they're wondering why they're overworked and stressed. And so it's backfired. And a lot of the women today are waking up to that, realizing this isn't working. This isn't, I'm not saying women shouldn't work, but I'm just saying this idea that you have the same role as a man, there should be no distinguish or differentiation between the two. Doesn't work. It just doesn't work.
Now, I want to bring up a point, maybe kind of jump down a rabbit hole, because as we talk about the roles of husband, the role of wife, and they're unique in their own respect,
Yes.
um, for the people who would maybe be listening to us and say, well, I don't, you guys are way off base. I want to bring in a couple passages that show the value of a Christian wife,
Okay.
because I think I want people to see what God's perspective is, that she's not a lower class individual. Just because Ephesians 5 tells her that she needs to submit to his culpability doesn't make her a lesser individual. So I would start with, let's start with Proverbs chapter 18,
Okay.
verse 22. And this is a good verse here. It says, he who finds a good wife obtains favor from God. I want to say a word or two about that particular passage. He who finds a good wife finds favor from God. Why is it that a schlup like me would find favor from God? Because of how good a person or wife my spouse is.
Mhm. Well, first of all, it's not good for men to be alone.
Okay.
All right. So that to find a wife in general is a blessing from God. And then to find one that's suitable to you, a companion in life. Now, it's interesting. People have this attitude today. You got to try before you buy. We got to make sure we're compatible. Well, there's some understanding about that. Most of the marriages in the Old Testament were arranged.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to understand that. So it's not all about romance. It's sometimes more pragmatic, and this friendship will create romance and it'll create the intimacy. But I kind of diverge. He says, if you find a woman that's truly suitable to you and is a good woman, a virtuous woman, like we'll look at in Proverbs 31, what a blessing that is from God. And so it raises the value of a woman in a man's life. It doesn't, lower it. It excels it, or exalts it. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yes, and probably my favorite passage along this theme is in chapter 19, verse 14.
Mm-hmm.
And for those of you who are watching, we're with Jack Hafer in Salem, Oregon this morning. And we're going to be turning it over to Proverbs 19, verse 14. And here's what Solomon says. He says, house and wealth are an inheritance from fathers, but a prudent wife is from the Lord.
So which would you
Wow.
rather have, riches or a prudent wife?
Well, I think if you took the average 20-year-old kid and you said, okay, son, dad's got $10,000 in the bank, and I'm going to give you my house, my money. I'm going to give you everything that I have. Or we could find you a good wife. Now, from a cultural perspective, what percentage of young men would choose the stuff that dad can provide?
Oh, yeah.
Right? But
Yeah.
God's got a different perspective on that. He says you could have Bill Gates's money.
Exactly.
But a prudent wife, not just any wife, a virtuous, prudent wife,
Mm-hmm.
that is a true gift from God. And I would like our ladies who are watching today to really focus on what that means. I mean, you are extra special, and your relationship to your husband is raised because of how God views the man-woman relationship.
And the flip side of that, because I can hear a lot of women saying, yeah, but I wish I could find a virtuous husband.
Oh, yeah.
It's interesting because one of the biggest number one complaint, perhaps, when it comes to marriage issues, when you're counseling, and Ann and I have talked to dozens and dozens of couples, and one of the things that keeps coming up, aside from the obvious issues, is a lack of spiritual leadership in her husband. He's supposed to be the head, but he's not a leader spiritually. And so that transcends, or it filters down to how he handles the finances, how he deals with the children, of course, how he deals with the brethren, his character, fighting issues with pornography or immorality. And so it goes both ways, but because I can hear them crying, oh, yeah, I'm trying to be a virtuous woman, but who's going to help my husband? So
Right.
this dance takes both sides, doesn't it?
Well, so we're talking about a husband being culpable for the family, good or bad,
Mm-hmm.
right? The family is going to tend to follow dad's lead,
Yes,
whatever that looks
good or
like.
bad. Mm-hmm.
And I look back at younger years when I totally failed in that realm, and I don't mind telling you that it grieves my heart, and it's one of those things I carry in my backpack that I don't know if I'll ever let go of, because I know that I failed my kids in a lot of areas as a
Mm-hmm.
younger dad. And boy, if I could have a day to go back and fix those.
Mm-hmm. You know what?
Um,
A sobering thing that I heard just this week, and you reminded me of Shaquille O'Neal, world
mm,
famous,
mhm.
Hall of Fame basketball player, just wanted to be famous. That was on his clip. But he was married, children, ended up divorced. And what was very poignant about what he said is, he says, I was all about the money and the fame. And if I were to do it all over again, I would do it different. And he was talking about being a better husband and a better father and less
Yes.
about notoriety and money. And I thought,
Yeah.
wow, here's a man of the world. And he's echoing what you and I are saying, or God has said right here.
Right.
And so it's true. It was interesting.
It is true. And if you don't think it's true, all you have to do is go back and study the bulk of the kings,
Yes.
right? And it'll say he did evil in the sight of the Lord, and he followed in his father's footsteps.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see clearly that usually well, first of all, dad is the standard for the family, and so goes dad, so goes the family.
Yes.
Most usually, that's not an absolute, but more true than it's not.
Yes. So do we have time to look at Ephesians 5 when you're talking about value of men and women in their marriage?
We do. We've got about 15 minutes left,
Uh-huh.
so you
Because
just kind
it's
of guide our
interesting
conversation.
when you're talking about the value and roles. Of course, this is the go-to, and it's interesting in my experience growing up in a Christian and family and environment. Men love to go to this verse because it says, "Women submit to your husband as to the Lord," because the husband's the head of the wife, just as Christ head of the church. He's being the savior of the body. So
And if I can just
go
let
ahead.
me interrupt just momentarily. Uh, I don't know if you're familiar with Emerson Eggerich's book, Love and Respect.
Well, actually, I was going to address some of that. That's good that you bring it up.
And the reason I brought it up at this point is because Emerson says, well, God told men he needed to love their wives because men naturally need to learn to love because we're not good at it. And wives need to respect their husbands because it's something they're not naturally good at. I'll let you take the rest.
And that's exactly right, because that's where Paul summarizes this section in verse 32 when he's talking about the two becoming one flesh. And so this is a great mystery. And it is a mystery. That's how this relationship between a man and woman. But he summarizes, nevertheless, let each one among you also love his own wife as himself. There's how you lead. And then let the wife cede to it. And he doesn't use the word submit. It says respect.
Yes.
So why did Paul switch horses here in the middle of the stream, or is it one and the same? Let's go back to the bull elk. Can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because sometimes men are as stupid as bull elk, because when they're in their rut, bull elks, they're just hormones are racing through them. And they'll do the stupidest thing, and all the caution goes to win. And that's why most of them get shot during the rut. It's interesting because all they're interested is in mating. All right. They don't think, but it's all about honor and respect. That's why they fight to the death they can with a younger bull that's trying to take over the harem. It's all about honor and respect. And that's nature teaches us that. And we are created very similarly, that we need honor and respect. If we're going to go out and fight wars, go out and battle in the economic world, fight Satan, bring home the food for our family, we need respect. That's the way we're hardwired from God. And we want it from our wife, no one else. That's all I care about is what Ann tells me if it was a good lesson, if I did well. Everybody else, a nice job, Jack. But I just need her honor and her respect. And what does she need?
She needs to be loved.
Because that's how she's hardwired. She has to know she's esteemed highly more than anyone else in the world. And that's why we, in this covenant of companions, I said, yes, I'll take you. And it's forever. I'm going to love you and put you on a throne.
For our ladies who are watching, I'm going to throw this out there, and I do not mean this flippantly at all, but Jack would agree with me. The most fragile thing in all the universe is the male ego.
Oh, it is.
And we will do anything. We'll leap tall buildings just for a compliment.
Yeah.
And that's what we do, right? I mean, and you're right. The rest of the congregation could say, hey, good job. Really liked your lesson today. But what matters most to me is if Kim says, hey, I really liked your lesson today.
Yeah.
But okay, where's the tree you want me to jump?
Yeah. Would do anything when we feel like, and then likewise, that's why it's hard for a lot of men to say, I'm sorry.
Right.
Because in their mind, in the world's view, they've lost respect and honor because they've, fallen short. It's hard. It's because this honor and respect thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, very well said.
All right. So we're noting out who's culpable for the family, really, and that's the way I'd like to say that, either responsible or culpable. And God clearly says in Ephesians 5 that it's the husband who has that responsibility. But we're also trying to point out the spiritual equality that our wives have with us. It's not a subservient relationship. It's just different roles. Right. So then, Jack, let's take a minute as we're in Ephesians 5. If we look at verses 22, 24, and 33, what exactly then is the wife's responsibility to her husband?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. The parallel is between Christ and his relationship with the church. And he says the same way it was a husband and wife. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, the head of the church is Jesus. And so whatever we do in word or deed, we do all in the name of the Lord. It's submissive, but it's a service role because we sing that song and I like it. God has no hands but our hands. Mm-hmm. No feet or no eyes, no mouth. We are Christ's body, and he only functions and accomplishes his will as he designed us to do, inasmuch as we serve or we submit. It's not always what we want to do, but like Jesus said in the garden, he didn't want to die. It's not about what I want, Lord. Let thy will be done and not mine. And so that's the essence of submission. I'm fulfilling my role so I can expand the will of the kingdom of Christ on this earth. I can bring glory to him by his good works. And what a wonderful, beautiful role that is to serve Jesus in this capacity, to be his hands and his feet, his spokesman, his mouth. That's exactly what we see with a woman.
So I think I just had a thought run across my mind as you were speaking just now, and that is, if we go to 1 Peter chapter 5 and look at verses 1 through 3, we see there that Peter is talking to elders, but he gives them an admonition. Yes, you're responsible for the flock, but you're not to lord over them. Meaning
1 Peter 5, yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Yeah, 1 Peter 5, 1 through 3. And so we're talking about leading our families in such a way that, they don't feel like they're being forced to.
Yes.
So anybody that looks at Ephesians 5 and says, well, the husband is the head of the wife. Yeah, but that comes with a cautionary note too. And that cautionary note is you can't lord it over your family.
Yes. Now it's interesting. You talk about culpability. The elders have to give an account for the flock that they're overseeing. In other words, why did that person go away or fall away? did you not tend to them? Did you not leave the 99 and go? There's a lot of responsibility. Is there a parallel here with the husband?
Absolutely.
But I like what he says here. Don't lord it over, but prove to be an example. And so that's how the elder leads, is by example. We don't push the flock. We lead and say, hey, come follow. You think that's similar with a husband? That's how he leads?
Well, it's been said that a man will lead his family in the same way he'll lead the church, and he'll lead the church in the same way he leads his family. So that's why those elder qualifications exist in 1 Timothy 3 and Titus chapter 1, and they're so important.
Yes.
It's better to not have elders than it is to put men into eldership who are not suited to do so.
Right.
And I think of whenever it was that, Jesus met Saul on the road to Damascus, and then he went to Ananias and told Ananias to go to Saul. And Ananias says, yeah, I don't really want to, and here's why.
Yes.
I think we need to point out the patience and the love that Jesus demonstrated in hearing Ananias out before he said, okay, I've heard you, now go.
Yeah, that's good. Let me say this, since you bring that up. 1 Peter 3 talks about a woman married to a non-believing husband, which I can't imagine how hard that is. And especially if he's not a godly man at all. And sometimes relationships, they're not, both partners, the spouses, aren't equally pursuing God on a level footing. And so it's dysfunctional at best. And so a wife might say, how can I submit to my husband when he's living this way? Or the husband might say, how can I love my wife and give myself up for her when she's this kind of person? And you bring up a real good point with Ananias. He did it for the Lord because the Lord asked him to do it. And secondary, he did it for Paul. He didn't want to go talk to Paul. He was afraid he's going to die. Well, and when it comes to submitting to God, that's why, first of all, I love my wife as Christ loved the church, because I'm doing it for Jesus, because he asked me to do it. Because sometimes, no, I won't even say that. I'll flip it around. That's why my wife submits, because sometimes I'm not the best leader. I don't make the best decision. I'm not the best example. And she does it not for me, first of all, but primarily for the Lord, to be faithful to him and fulfilling her role. So God will say, well done, thou good and faithful servant. And that's where you can find the motivation when you're in these relationships that aren't functioning the best. You can glorify God and, well, make a pearl out of a grain of sand. That's what happens in an oyster.
Well, and if you look at Christ's relationship with the church, he took a bunch of misfits, a bunch of sinners, people from all different kinds of life, and even from the dregs of society, and he made a church out of them. And husbands need to understand that we are to love our wife, we are to lead our wife and our family in the same way that Christ leads the church. And we're talking about the same Lord who washed the feet of his disciples. You're talking about the same Lord who listened to Ananias's complaint before he told him to go ahead and go. You're talking to the same Lord who listened to Paul. He said, look, aren't I the best guy to talk to these guys? They know me. Jesus says, yeah, I want you to leave Jerusalem.
Right.
So you see repeatedly that patience of listening, being graceful. So the example there would be, as husbands, we need to do a better job of listening to our wives, listening to our children. Particularly, I think a lot of dads get in trouble because, we don't listen to all sides of the thing before we make a decision.
That's right.
You get a piece of it, you make a decision, you go, and the kids go, Dad, you're being unfair.
Yes. And you bring up some good things. So husbands have to learn to listen. So then, and then not be impulsive. Yeah. I like what you said about grace, because it takes a lot of grace in a marriage. And what I mean grace is when people don't live up to expectations. That's when we feel hurt and get angry, is when expectations, whether they're perceived or real, aren't met.
Hmm.
And that's when we have resentment and bitterness sets in. And there are certain built-in expectations in a marriage, because God outlines them for us, and we made a oath to each other. But it takes grace, because I don't live up to my responsibility perfectly, and so I want grace from my wife and forgiveness. And likewise, I have to extend the same thing to her. Yeah, we'll let that go, and we'll work on it next time. But forgive and forget, truly forget. And it takes a lot of grace, doesn't it, in a marriage to excel still more.
But now you're bringing in 1 Corinthians 13, because if I'm loving my wife and she's loving me in the way that we ought to, we're not keeping a scorecard, right?
Exactly.
And 3 days ago you said, well, and it really hurt my feelings, or I didn't care
Yes.
for the way you said, you know, and I appreciate you bringing that up, that it's not just a matter of moving on, it's forgetting. Say, okay, I'm not going to let 10 seconds of a day ruin my entire day, right? But
Right.
a lot of times we do that. All right, Jack. Hey, we've come up against the clock, and believe it or not, we're already at the top of the hour.
Well, good. That way I won't
So,
say anything that I'll regret later when I get home.
well, let me just why don't you take a minute or two and give us a couple of closing thoughts, and then we'll end the live stream.
Well, thank you, Bill, a lot. I appreciate the opportunity. It's interesting. When we married our spouse, we did so because there was something attractive about them, and we made a choice. And yes, there was romance, and you might have been in, that puppy love stage. But if anything is taught in Scripture, and we learn by experiences, that you can create that romance again, and you can maintain it, and you can have a deeper love than what was very superficial then, if we just learn to value the differences in our spouses. Because I wouldn't want to marry you, Bill. You're a good friend, but I wouldn't want to.
Hey, you don't want a mug like this.
That's right. So there's God created women for us, and yet while they're different, we want to value the differences, not resent them.
Right.
Especially with women looking at men too. Yeah, they're different. They don't talk as much as you would want them to, but value what they do bring rather than resent what they're not. And if we can
Right.
learn to do that, then we can bring the best out in each other, and marriage can be what God intended to be. So I
Yeah,
appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Jack. First of all, it's great to see you. I've missed seeing you in our coffee visits out there in Salem. Um, I think what you're talking about is so critical. We're talking about, yeah, early on in the marriage, it's fun and exciting, and all the physical stuff is great. But as you get older, as you get more mature, we're talking about a deeper intellectual love and connection with one another that's based on God's word. And that's my encouragement to everybody watching today: is take this time that we're uh, sheltering in place, if you will, and focus on the things that matter. Spend time, you know, working on communication. Spend time studying God's word and what our different roles are in the eyes of Almighty Jehovah.
Amen.
All
Appreciate
right.
it.
Well, I wished we had 3 more hours to keep talking
Well,
on this topic.
you're very nice. And say hi to the brethren for me and everyone that's listening. Uganda, way to go, Peter. That's impressive. And Lord willing, I get down there to Africa again, and say hi to your wife, Kim, and Barbara again. I'd like to see you and your family and grandkids, but Lord willing, we'll make it out your way sometime, Bill.
Yeah, and hopefully next time I get to the Northwest, we can maybe we can meet halfway and have some lunch or something. But my best to Miss Ann,
Thank you.
David, and Heather, and all the brethren there in South Salem. And so with that, Jack, I'm going to go ahead and end the live stream,
All
and then
right.
maybe we can chat by phone here in just a few minutes.
Thank you.
All right. God bless everyone. Have a great week. Thank you for tuning in. This is our 3rd episode of our Iron Sharpening Iron series. Next week, we'll have BJ Sipe from Danville, Kentucky,
All right.
joining with us. So We'll see y'all. Have a great and blessed day. Bye-bye.